Now, always plenty to see in the Sunday papers. Joining me now for a look through them are the Sunday Mirror's political editor, Nigel Nelson, and the academic and author, Joanna Williams. So, very good morning to both of you. Nice to see you both. So, Nigel, let's start with you. And a number of the front pages, again, have Prince Harry on them, either their main story or a photograph or royal related. And this is still 2 days until his memoir actually comes out. But pick up on the Sunday Express's front page, because already there's a backlash after those books accidentally went on sale in Spain briefly, so everyone's got their head around what's in it.
Yes, and this bit is his admission that he killed 25 Taliban when he was serving as an Apache pilot in Afghanistan. What the Express is saying that as a result of that, he's put, as the Express puts it, in the crosshairs of his family, in the crosshairs of the extremists. And they describe Harry's situation now on a par with the security threats against Vladimir Putin and Donald Trump. And I think it was a hugely unfortunate comment by Prince Harry. I'm sure he was goaded on by his ghostwriter to reveal how many people he'd killed. But of course, soldiers don't normally do that. And Harry could have got round that by saying, look, I was just doing my job as a soldier. I did what had to be done. I don't want to dwell on it. I think is actually putting a figure on the number of kills that has caused the real problem.
Well, yes, that's right. And some people suggesting that perhaps he could have been advised and looked after a bit more, you could say, as far as that kind of revelation and what the impact could be. Let's move on. There's another story on the front of the Sun, Joanna, that you were interested in picking up on. And this is another allegation against his brother, Prince William.
Yes, absolutely. I agree with Nigel completely that Harry's been very badly advised in some of these interviews or some of the revelations he's made during the interviews. But I think where I disagree a little bit is the extent to which he's needed to be goaded into this by a ghostwriter, because it seems to me that he's been very happy to divulge things that we just don't need to know at all. So this is another story about the brothers fighting. I have to say, it actually makes me feel far more sympathetic for William than it does for Harry. I do think that I'm one of 5 siblings, myself the eldest of 5 siblings, and I think anyone who comes from a family, anyone with siblings, tensions are running high, particularly sadly at events like a funeral, and fighting does take place, and sometimes sadly that even does mean physical blows. I have to say, in my experience of talking to people, I kind of think we've all been there, and this is how families work, but the difference is that normally this is very, very much something which is firmly behind closed doors. This is something which is private and something that's within the family, and one of the reasons for that is that it makes it an awful lot easier to have a drink, have a laugh, make up, and patch the relationship up. The worry is that the more you put these things out there, the more you make them public, the more difficult it becomes to take a step back and actually rebuild a relationship. One of the things that just strikes me about Harry, which I think is actually quite sad, is that he just seems to have absolutely no sense of privacy, no sense of what should be kept private. There's no boundary there between what he makes public and what he keeps private. And I think that's not only a potential danger, as Nigel points out, but it's also just very sad for the future of his family relationships.
Yeah, he might say it's a relief to be able to talk publicly now that he's no longer a working royal. A very quick thought, Nigel, do you think that we will hear any reaction from Prince William after these allegations, or his father, the King?
No, I don't. I think it'll be the usual royal family, never complain, never explain. So no, I don't think there'll be a reaction, which is also a bit sad that we're only hearing one side of the story. And Joe just mentioned Harry's decided as he's no longer a royal, he can break sort of this privacy protocol. But then he's the one who's been complaining about people invading his own privacy, and now he's done just that.
Yes, although he would say, at least I've got control of the narrative, I guess he would say. Anyway, let's move on to other issues. And Nigel, I know you wanted to pick up on one of the many health stories that are also on the front page. It's such a big issue, the pressures that the health service is suffering this winter. The Observer has a story that suggests that hospitals are offering patients the option of going private. Talk us through what they're saying.
Yeah, well, what is happening is NHS trusts are offering fast-track treatment so you can beat the waiting lists, provided that their patients are prepared to pay for it. So, in other words, they're getting the same NHS treatment in the same hospitals that they would get for free, but instead they're having to actually fork out. So we're talking about a hip replacement, the going rate is 10,000, cataracts at 2,200, hernia repair at 2,500. Now, this is actually the same price that it costs the NHS to carry out those procedures. So the big question is going to be well, hang on, if they've got spare capacity in their private sectors within those hospitals, why aren't they using that to reduce waiting lists and treat NHS patients? By doing it this way, what they're creating essentially is a two-tier health system.
Well, yes, and lots of, as I say, health stories around, including reports that there could be a possible winter pressure package being announced by the Health Secretary later on this week. So we're going to get lots of these kind of stories, I think, as the week goes on. But in the meantime, Joanna, you wanted to talk about the other story that's on the front of the Observer. And while we've been focused a lot on industrial action, well, in lots of different sectors, but including health, now there's the potential for a teacher's strike.
Yeah, I think this will be news that many parents, myself included, have been dreading. I'm generally, I have to say, very, very sympathetic to strikers. I'm very sympathetic to people wanting higher wages, particularly at a time when inflation's running extremely high. We're having this cost of living crisis. I do think it's only fair that people are able to strike. I don't agree with new striking legislation being introduced. But I do worry that teachers are going to struggle to take the public with them. And I am being completely honest, including myself in that. And the reason why is because schools have been closed for so much of the past 2 years because of lockdown. And it was the teachers' unions, we now know, and as was clear at the time, that we're really pushing for longer periods of school closures, for more restrictions upon children. And there's been very little done, it seems, to recompense children for the education that they missed. The government's catch-up programs have failed in many instances to actually provide the tutoring that children, particularly children from disadvantaged backgrounds, need to actually catch up and make up for the lost ground that they suffered during the 2 years of lockdown closures. And I just think for parents and for children, this is going to come as another sign that education is considered of very low importance to the government and actually, sadly, to the teaching unions as well. And I think parents are going to be absolutely tearing their hair out over the prospect of having to make short-term childcare arrangements over the course of the next 2 months.
Well, yes, another potential headache for the government, Nigel. And Rishi Sunak has talked about how education matters to him just this week, hasn't he? And this idea of maths, for example, continuing on for pupils up to 18, potentially. But there is a meeting that's been called on Monday, isn't there, with union leaders about some of the different disputes that are going on. What do you think the government's next step might be when you've got the prospect of another sector threatening strike action? As junior doctors could go on strike as well. This could spread. What do you think their next move might be?
Well, a very good question. At the moment, it seems to be that Rishi Sunak's plan is to follow what Margaret Thatcher did with the miners and basically tough it out. The government still won't talk about pay. They won't sit down at the table and negotiate that. And the difference between what Margaret Thatcher was doing and what Rishi Sunak is doing is this Prime Minister is fighting on so many different fronts. So it is difficult to see how he can win by simply staring the the unions down. I think that somewhere along the line, he's got to actually come up with a compromise with the unions. That will mean better pay. It may not mean sort of meeting double-digit inflation, but I think he's got to actually find a way of getting out of this, or this could go on for months and months.
Well, that's right, and every union will be watching what other unions get to see if there's some kind of precedent that's set as well. So that'll be interesting to see how that plays out, if there are improved offers. So it's going to be an interesting week on that front, isn't it? Actually, Nigel, it was your story that we were going to move on to next. Well, let's go to Joanna. Let's be fair. Let's divide this up. Joanna, let's go to your story in the Sunday Times. And Keir Starmer wanting to go to Davos. This is this meeting of lots of mainly business leaders, isn't it? I think it's the Swiss Alps, isn't it? Where is Davos?
Yes, that's right.
Someone
it's
like that.
World
Somewhere
Economic
glamorous
Forum.
anyway. Yes. So tell us about what the implications of Keir Starmer wanting to go are.
Yes, so it's the World Economic Forum meeting at Davos. Keir Starmer wants to go to rub shoulders with business leaders, foreign leaders, and the kind of the global elite. And he thinks this is a good positioning. He can make the case for Labour being the party of business, show that they can be taken seriously on the world stage. I'm sure he will be successful in being able to do that. I'm absolutely convinced he will be able to go to the World Economic Forum and prove to these global leaders that he is one of them. But I do wonder how well exactly this will play out in particularly the what we call now the red wall, the working class parts of the UK, where Starmer does actually need to be picking up the votes. I'm not completely convinced that people in Middlesbrough or Morecambe are going to be that impressed at the sight of Starmer in Davos at a time of this cost of living crisis.
Okay, and no doubt the cost of living crisis will emerge in our next chat in an hour's time. But for the moment, Nigel and Joanna, good to talk about the papers. We'll see you again in an hour.